Ladies and gentlemen, today let me talk in English. Some request from the United States, Korean Americans who do not understand Korean fluently, and today let me analyze a issue of NATO's concern when Trump is re-elected in the coming November presidential election. A very interesting policy paper was released by the Brookings Institute 2 days ago with the title of Could NATO Survive a Second Trump Administration? 트럼프의 재선 시 나토에게는 큰 시련이 올 것이다. If I translate into Korean. This is a very meaningful paper because Donald Trump, when he is re-elected, could change all the security policies, spending a lot of money, probably in Europe, changing NATO's administrative skills and also the operational structures, which requires a lot of money, and possibly also could change the security pictures in East Asia, troops in Korea and the troops in Okinawa, Japan. So this paper is very, very meaningful in understanding why some experts in the United States are much concerned with Trump's radical changes when he is re-elected in the coming November presidential election. So, according to Stephen Pfeiffer, who is a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institute, he argues that NATO has safeguarded the U.S. and transatlantic treaty for 75 years, and under Democratic and the Republicans president alike, 75 years of history. Could NATO survive a second Donald Trump administration? Most likely not, at least with the United States as a committed ally and alliance leader. And that would pose a serious challenges for the European part of the alliance. So what are the Trump's skepticism about NATO? This is a crucial question, I think. Trump's skepticism of allies and alliances date back well more than 3 decades. He believes that they impose an outsized budgetary burden on the United States, for which it is not paid. Further, he believes that allies use their defense savings to bolster their industries, outcompete the United States in trade, and take American jobs. This is a America First policy version of interpretation, spending too much money for NATO members. So Trump's views seemed to change a little when he assumed the responsibilities of the presidency when he was elected at that time. At his first NATO meeting in 2017, he complained that allies did not devote 2% of their gross domestic product to defense, a goal NATO leaders had set as a target to meet by 2024. More than 2/3 of the allies will hit that target this year. Well, we are watching it. And at a 2018 Alliance Summit, Trump reportedly asked Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, should we make history here and pull out of NATO? Some radical suggestion there. And Trump did not endorse Article 5 of NATO's 1949 Washington Treaty, also known as the North Atlantic Treaty, which states that an attack against one shall be considered an attack against them all. Reaffirming Article 5 is something American president, ritualistically do in part because Article 5 does not commit allies to a specific action. However, American president, other than Trump, made it clear the United States would come to the aid of an attacked ally with U.S. military force. That bolsters deterrence. Trump has signaled something very different, very different. In February, he told a campaign rally that he had warned allies that if they did not pay up, he would absolutely not defend them, adding, I would encourage the Russians to do whatever the hell they want. Some different views here. Also, Trump does not appear to share other president's view that the United States has a vital national interest in a stable and secure Europe, which NATO helps to ensure for the United States. Further, bases in Europe allow the U.S. military to forward deploy forces closer to hotspots in the Middle East and Africa. United States Africa Command, for example, is headquartered in Germany. And NATO has invoked Article 5 only once in its history in defense of the United States after 9/11. More than 1,000 NATO troops died in Afghanistan, fighting there, alongside their American comrades. They were there only because they were U.S. allies. On the other hand, Trump seemed to have an affinity for autocrat, and for Russian President Vladimir Putin in particular. He has rarely criticized Putin, whose war on Ukraine has blown up Europe's security. The fact that Trump administration nonetheless bolstered the U.S. military presence in Europe and increased sanctions on Russia should offer little assurances. As president, Trump showed a weak grasp of how the U.S. government works and of how to turn his views into policy, realistic policies. Moreover, advisors such as retired General John Kelly, former White House Chief of Staff, and McMaster, National Security Advisor, and Jim Mattis, former Secretary of Defense, worked to soften his worst impulses, to change his radical views. So what are the policies and players in a second Trump administration if he is re-elected? Things would almost certainly play out differently in a second term in which Trump's instinctive skepticism about NATO, affinity for Putin and disdain for Ukraine would take charge. His campaign website says that United States should finish the process we began under my administration of fundamentally re-evaluating NATO's purpose and NATO's mission. That is early times when Moscow had launched the bloodiest war in Europe, and since the World War II, and NATO is as important as ever for deterring and containing Russia as of now. Plans have been developed to translate Trump's views into policy, and the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 section on Europe offers 3 visions for dealing with Russia. Number 1, 2 of which would appear to lessen the U.S. commitment to NATO and leaves it to the president to decide. Trump almost certainly would choose one of those 2. A briefing paper that reportedly got attention in Trump's inner circle argued that the United States should adopt a dormant NATO policy. That would mean shifting the primary defense burden to European allies, while America served as an offshore balancer of the last resort. That diminution of the U.S. role in NATO appears to mesh well with Trump's thinking. And lists are being prepared of potential officials to implement those policies. The list will include the likes of Kelly, McMaster, and Mattis, but people such as Richard Cornell and Elbridge, Colby, and Grinnell, who served as Trump's ambassador to Germany, has been described as transactional and isolationist. In 2020, he pushed for a drawdown of U.S. troops in Germany because the Germans had not met 2% defense spending target, a target that NATO had agreed should be met by 2024, and which Germany hit this year. Colby argued for a China-first policy that would leave little room for U.S. commitment to NATO, like that. Moreover, today's Republican Party is no longer the party of Ronald Reagan and John McCain. While some Republican senators and members of Congress support a strong U.S. presence in NATO, few have shown any readiness to challenge Trump, who has firmly locked down his position as a GOP leader. In fact, quite the opposite. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has consistently supported NATO and Ukraine, recently penned an opinion editorial entitled, "We cannot repeat the mistakes of the 1930s." However, he has endorsed Trump, whose America First views echo precisely those mistakes. In any case, McConnell will step down from his leadership position in November. Also, former National Security Advisor Bolton has finally predicted in a second Trump term, we would almost certainly withdraw from NATO. The 2024 National Defense Authorization Act includes a provision requiring 2/3 of Senate approval for a decision to leave NATO. However, it is not clear that would survive a legal challenge. Even if Trump did not formally withdraw, he could draw down U.S. forces in Europe, and if it came to it, simply ignore Article 5. Some possibilities. So, what are the views of NATO allies in Europe? Allied leaders already have reason to doubt Trump's commitment to the alliance system in Europe. If Trump wins in November and Putin shares that doubt, the security risk for Europe would grow significantly. NATO leaders understandably view the prospect of a Trump return with trepidation and privately talk of Trump proofing the alliance while considering ways to persuade their former president of NATO's value. That trepidation is a factor that has helped boost defense spending by European NATO members as a way to demonstrate that Europe is taking on a greater share of the burden, but also as a hedge against a Trump decision to downgrade the U.S. commitment to the alliance. Some European officials have reached out to Trump. Those efforts have not had an evident effect as of now. Were Trump to win in November, if he wins in November presidential election, then if he reduces the U.S. commitment, he's willing to reduce U.S. commitment. This is question. A number of challenges would confront European NATO members. First, Ukraine question. Trump recently reiterated that he would end U.S. support for the war. That would mean a greater financial burden on Europe. But Europe alone lacks the defense industrial capacity to meet Ukraine's need, at least in the near term. Second, Russian question. NATO's European members collectively have an economy many times larger than Russia's. They would need time, however, to turn that economic capacity into a hard military power and would face a particular struggle making up for enablers now provided by the US military, such as intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance asset, heavy airlift, and long-range strike capabilities, such as conventionally armed air and sea-launched cruise missiles. Third, the nuclear dimension. Were Trump to fold the nuclear umbrella, the United States extend over NATO, could be nuclear forces of Britain and France suffice to protect all European members of the alliance? Question. Big question. US nuclear umbrella question. The nuclear dimension question. Or Trump to fold the nuclear umbrella, the United States extend over NATO, could the nuclear forces of Britain and France suffice to protect all European members of the alliance? The possible end of the American extended deterrent have even prompted a discussion in Britain about a German need for nuclear arms, Germans' own nuclear development. As we are talking about, South Korea is talking about nuclear developing possibilities by our own hands, something like that. Fourth, NATO leadership on major questions traditionally has come from Washington. If the United States under Trump were to withdraw, as Bolton predicted, or just dramatically cut back its role, who would take up the leadership mantle after that? And the European members of the alliance must further build their militaries and continue to take on a greater share of defense burden for Europe, particularly as the United States has to deal with a rising China in the Indo-Pacific region. That shift is already well underway. Non-US members of NATO, European members plus Canada accounted for about 27% of the total NATO member defense spending in 2014, and in 2024, that figure has risen to about 36%. The problem is that even that kind of an increase likely would not prove enough for Trump, who has suggested that allies devote 4% of the GDP to defense, and that, if re-elected, he would move abruptly to scale back the U.S. role in the alliance system. NATO, absent a strong U.S. commitment in a second Trump administration, would be a very different and considerably weaker organization if Trump, implement his views radically. So in conclusion, this Brookings Institute paper says that there is a small chance that Trump, who often seems uninterested in specific policies, might leave NATO alone. Even in that event, however, could Europe count on the mercurial and unpredictable former president when the chips were down? Some question here. It would not appear to be a good bet. This is conclusion. This paper suggests, some implications for South Korean security policymakers. Even the America First policy of Trump's version, if he is re-elected, could change, the traditional alliance system in Europe, formed around the NATO operation. Then, which means that he would also challenge, some radical changes here in East Asian region. The change of the roles of the U.S. troops on the Korean Peninsula, also U.S. troops in Okinawa, Japan. he will surely make some changes to secure more security interests, also saving their financial burdens, abroad, spending for the American troops. So this Brookings Institute paper gives us some lessons. How shall we prepare from possible radical changes that Trump second administration will reveal when he is reelected in the coming November presidential election. So a lot of talks are going on around the Korean Peninsula, especially centering around the nuclear issues. So North Korean Russian alliance treaty revived currently about 1 week ago when Putin visited Pyongyang. So how South Korea could defend our own national interest based on the concept of nuclear reciprocity in the future. So we have to now study and research several scenarios possibly to be raised by the Trump second administration. And we have to conclude that what are the best options for South Koreans, accepting Trump's views, then also melting down his views into our national interest after a hard negotiation with the American officials in the future. This is my conclusion. Thank you. Have a nice lunch. It's already past 12:18, so I will have a lunch. Thank you. Today, my English-speaking comment on the security issue could be helpful for those Korean Americans living in the United States, in English-speaking countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. Thank you so much.